my journey, I grew up in this area. I grew up in Dodge County. And I moved away when I was 20 and came back here in 2012. I left it when I was 20 to pursue, I thought was a career with food service because that's what I went to school for at Marine Park Tech in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. I graduated from Horicon High School in 1982. Thought the world was going to end that year. Late great planet Earth came out, and I thought all the planets were going to line up and then we were going to die. I don't know if any of you thought that or not back in it, that you probably weren't even born then. Early on in my life, there was a lot of trauma, and it's only through self-discovery that I found this out. I had to do a lot of research, I guess, to really get to the bottom of it and figure out really what happened to me, because I wanted to understand why I was so prone, I guess, to this problem. I didn't know, of course we know the enemy, he lies to all of us. I don't know, I found out with my own experience that he tells us all the same thing. I thought I was the only one, the one that was the worst one, and I didn't know what to do with that, because as a teenager growing up, or if you're struggling with any low self-esteem or whatever, you feel like you can't tell anyone. And so my struggle began very young in life. I don't know if I can't pinpoint a specific time, but there was a lot of things going on in our family household as a very young boy that I still am trying to figure out in my life. Of having a relationship with the Lord, most of my life knowing him as Savior, but not really coming to the knowledge of him as the Lord of my life till later, I thought I was fine. I was never taught conversion, not taught that I needed to be born again. A certain denomination that I love to this day does not teach the born-again experience. It's baptism and confirmation that save you, And so I thought I was fine. And so you'd go to church Sunday, you check it off your list. But I had this desire, I can call it the double elephant in the room, because I had same-sex attraction problems. And so not only did I have pornography issues, I had another issue that was taboo and still is taboo in the church. And the church does not want to deal with this issue. And or we don't want to talk about it. We don't even know how. And so anyway, when I was younger, I had an attraction that way, and I never understood why. I thought I was just odd and weird and all that kind of stuff because the enemy tells you so. And so I guess I had my first experience when I was 12. But before that, I got excited in the playground on the poles, and I don't know why. It was something that I was already experimenting at 2 or 4, or probably 4 years old. And this continued through my life because you're just wanting that high all the time. And so it wasn't until I was a teenager, your body changes and things. So I had an experience with a fellow neighbor of mine, and through that experience, that changed kind of produced even more shame, because I knew inside. I think if we're Christian or following God, we know what the Scripture says. I knew what the Scripture said, and this was not acceptable. And so living with that alone is enough, to drive you crazy because you know that it's not right. Anyhow, I just found that this is all has a relationship with the Lord. It's a continual thing. And this December, just this last year in 25, I discovered some things that I never knew. And he told me before, but I didn't hear him. I don't know, have any of you ever been to that selective hearing phase of your life, or you can have deception in an area and you can't hear. He met me, my best friend that I grew up with, several years ago, probably 10 maybe. I don't know exactly how many years ago it was. And he shared he said, Joel, did anything ever go on with you, because he felt bad about that experience, and he's talking about it, but I couldn't talk about it still. I had too much shame in this area because I hadn't completely come to terms with the person I had become. And so I apparently didn't hear what he said, because he told me that he explained it then. I don't even remember. Isn't that something? So anyway, December this year, I called him up and I just started talking to him because we were friends on Facebook. And he said, Joel, I told him, I said, I didn't tell you the truth 10 years ago. I said, I've been struggling with this thing my entire life. And he said, and then he felt bad that this happened because he felt like he contributed to this thing. I said, no, it is an experience that happened. It's something that I had to come to grips with because I was the shame factor you're talking about. It was so overwhelming if you don't deal with this thing. And in growing up in my earlier years, there was a lot of shame in my family. I don't know if you had the same relatives I had, but my aunts and always, they would want you to be seen but not heard. And so they would say, shame on you if you did something wrong. I mean, they were quick to point the finger and push shame on you. What if you did something wrong or spoke too loud or whatever you did, tipped over the vase or whatever you did when you're younger. And so I knew about shame from other people in my family early on. But then when you have that experience with another individual, there's a connection made. And then you long for more, if especially there was a void in my life. And I found out early on, my dad and I, this happened way young, like 2, 3 years old. I don't remember it. He remembered it. And so one day we got to talking about it after I'd gone through Bible school. We had talked about this thing and talked about my early years. He said, yeah, when you were 3 years old, you said, I hate you and I want nothing to do with you, to my dad. He said it was like something just went through him, and from that point on, it was like there was a rejection. He rejected me, and I felt rejected by him. And so that created something in me that I wasn't even aware of at the time, He didn't know that it went through my dad, and from that point on, he probably did things that repelled me, and I did things, And so we discovered that fact that, wow, the enemy started working early in our life. I was a child. I didn't know any better, but my dad really didn't either, even as an adult, what to do. I'm the youngest son of 3. There's 5. Well, they had 6 kids, but their daughter after me died 1 year old, and then they tried and had another one. So there's 5 in my family. And so for many years, I became the baby of the family, which I absolutely hated, because all the grandmas and all those wonderful people of the family would always pinch my cheeks, and say, oh, you're the baby of the family. I said, oh, just get out of here. I didn't want to hear that because I didn't want to be the baby. I didn't want to be a baby. I wanted to be somebody else, but not the baby. And so in our household, growing up was unusual to begin with. I was born in 1963. Our house, we're farmers. Our house was a double family house. And so before I was born, my dad's dad and his mother lived in the house with my parents. And before that, this was common practice years ago. I guess, I don't think everybody went through this, but my family did. My great-grandfather came to this country, and he's the one that purchased the land. And so then he moved into the farm where I grew up. They had their kids, and then one of his sons stayed in the house. So there was 2 generations there. And then when my dad got married, he didn't move. So there was 3 generations there at one time. And so living in the house, the Bible tells us to leave and cleave. Well, my father never left and cleaved. And so there was some issues in my household. My dad, because of his father and respecting his father, never really, most of their, I was raised by good parents, and so I don't want you to think that my parents were evil or ugly or anything. I had the greatest parents in the world, but it was very dysfunctional in my family because my dad honored his dad more than he honored his wife for a period of time. If my grandfather said, I remember my mother saying, she would buy this was something she said, I bought a 19-cent light switch, and there was a big argument about it with my dad's dad, and she said she could never forget it. So there's a lot of unforgiveness there, because toward my father, because my father didn't protect my mom and cleave to her. He honored sometimes his dad more than my mother, and so that created a problem of its own. And then my mother's mother lived in our house too. When I was born in 1963, my grandfather's wife already had passed away in 59 or 60, and my grandmother's husband died in 1961, and she had a complete nervous mental breakdown, and then she came to live with us about the time I was born. And so I don't know why, but she must have needed someone to think that I was her son. So she raised me kind of as her son, and my father never stepped in. So that created a void in my life of my dad. I wanted a father figure but didn't have one. And so the older three were different, raised a little different than me. My grandmother doted over me, and how as a little kid you're going to gravitate toward this thing, and it's like I have to accept that fact. I blame myself all my life for everything. And so coming to this understanding of where this happened and what happened and all the trauma that happened in my life, my best friend died at 6, my sister died when I was 6. All these things that happened in my life created more voids in my life where I didn't trust anyone. They're going to die. And so I became Lone Ranger. So that's how I lived most of my life. So I was afraid to tell anyone about anything. I kept it to myself until I think I was 29 years old, when I finally let somebody know this was an issue in my life. I don't know how I did it, to be honest, because I had a lot of mental issues. I felt like I was always looking for something, trying to fit in, never felt like you did. And it wasn't until January of this last year, in 2026, that it all finally came to, or actually November. For the last year and a half until November, I was diagnosed with, I'm going to come current because I don't have much time. This last November, okay, let me back up just a little. In May of 24, in 2024, I was working at a church and being the lunch guy because I can only do part-time because I had a stroke in 22. And so I finally went back, or I went to work. There's just too much to talk about. I don't even know where to start. But anyway, I'll go back to that experience. I was doing a lunch for the school, and I just kept getting weaker and weaker, and I'm like, something's wrong here. So I went to the doctor and finally diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia in July of 2024. Well, before that, when that happened, or just before that happened, when I finished the school year, I just didn't want to cook anymore. I was just tired of cooking. Cooking has been my career for 40-some years. I love cooking. I love just doing that. Well, I was just sick of it, and I said, God, take your gift away. I don't want this anymore. And that's pretty much saying, okay, denying Christ pretty much, because that was the gift that he gave me, and I loved my gift, and so I said, I don't need you anymore. I didn't realize until recently that's really what I said. And so for the next year and a half, until November of this last year, for a year and a half, I felt nothing. I felt no presence of God. I didn't want to cook, all these things, and my wife and everybody, I've been married for I will be married for 30 years this coming August. And why my wife had put up with me all these years, because I've had several encounters with different people along my life's way, not all the time. But I am so grateful for a God that loves me, and I know him now today better than I've ever known him before in my life. Because of this last year and a half, I didn't want to live anymore because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't give anything. I'm a go-getter. I like to do things for people, and I got to the point where I couldn't hardly wash a dish. I was exhausted from this leukemia because I had told God, take your gift and shove it, basically. And I didn't realize really what the consequences would be of that action. And I was on the worship team. I was praying, trying to do everything that I could, all in the flesh. I didn't feel the presence of God at all during that year and a half. I was going through the motions, a church person in the church, trying to pretend to be a good Christian and all this stuff, and I did my best to do it, but I was getting to the point where this is not working. And so anyway, November this last year, because I couldn't work. After May, I got so with this leukemia that I was diagnosed with, I couldn't work. And so I couldn't barely, like I said, barely lift a dish, but I still kept praising the Lord, I thought, at church and doing the things that you should do, that you think you should do, but not having the Spirit of God in you or around you and feeling Him. And so on January, this last year, the first Sunday of January, or in November, we applied for disability. It took 2 years to get, long story short. And finally, we got my disability in November. I didn't think God was ever going to help me again. I felt like the worst person in the world. I wanted to die. If there was a purgatory, I felt like I was in it, because I didn't feel God's presence, and on the other side, the enemy is screaming at me, saying, "You're using this is the phrase he said to me: you're using somebody else's breath." And when you start to believe that, you don't want to live. And so things got pretty dark until November, when my wife said, "Look in our checking account." Why? Oh, and I saw a lump sum for 11 months in my checking account from Social Security for disability, because we waited 2 years, and I didn't think we were ever going to get it. And I looked at the checking account. I started to cry. And I said, "That's not real. I won't believe it until, because it's pending, But when I finally got into my account, the Lord started really showing me. He was with me all the time. I just couldn't see him. And the first Sunday of January, we had Testimony Sunday at our church, and I couldn't wait. I thought I was going to preach or talk about Galatians 6:1 that says, "You who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, lest you also fall and be tempted." But no, it was 1 John chapter 1, starting at verse 5. Oh, you want me to go here? You think you have fellowship, but you're walking in darkness. And that was me. And so I got up still excited because the Lord had touched me. So I got up in church that Sunday, read the chapter, and I said, "This was me." I said, "I'm the biggest hypocrite here in my church." I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't ashamed at all, because God had somehow touched me and said, "Joel, I love you." But I knew what I had to do. I hid my needs. I hid everything. I didn't want to, because a man will take care of himself. That's how I was raised. You don't ask for help. My dad told me many times when I went on the mission trip and tried to get money, he said, "You're just begging for money." And so I had a wrong belief system, thinking that I had to do it all myself. And so that's what I did all my life. Try to fix me. I couldn't do it. I was suffering and bleeding all my life, wanting to get clean, but didn't know exactly how to do it because I was afraid to ask for help, too ashamed to ask for help. So on that Sunday, when I said I'm the biggest hypocrite here, and I told them the story. I said, for the last year and a half, I'm on the worship team, didn't feel a thing. I'm praying, I didn't feel a thing, right in front of you here. And I asked the church to forgive me. I said, I walked in darkness. I wasn't walking right this whole time. And I needed to ask for help, and I didn't, but I'm asking you today to forgive me. And I'm asking you for help. And so that was the beginning of a new me. So here today, tonight, I can say, because of those decisions that I made, I am now facing things that I never would face. I faced it so far, but I wouldn't get up here and tell you this thing because it's my life. I was too ashamed, too embarrassed. I felt like the worst person on earth. Why? But God, that Sunday, proved himself to me through a congregation that is helping me every day. I have strong men around me now that I go to, that I'm not afraid to talk about, that I'm not afraid to be myself with. And it's changing me every day still. I'm not there, but I'm getting there because of his love for me. He's proven himself since that day. And one last thing, I guess, or I don't know, I got to stop, but my wife and I went, we were going on vacation in January. We went to San Diego, but before that, we were going to go visit some people. Well, we got a call when we just left 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes into the trip, got to Horicon, got a phone call from friends of ours in Alexander, Minnesota, because we lived there. I was a food service director there for 7 years at a camp, 1,000-bed camp. And so one of our friends was diagnosed with cancer, given 36 to 72 hours to live. And so our plans changed. We went to her, because it was my wife's best friend. So we drove straight there. And so that night, I said to the family, I want to cook for you breakfast the next morning. And that was the first time I loved it again. And the gift, God gave me it back. And his presence became so clear again. And it hasn't changed. It's here every day. And I don't ever want to let go of the hem of his garment again by just giving into the flesh to do the unthinkable, and because I'm surrounded by people, I can say, hey, I'm in trouble. Will you pray for me? And it's changed my life because I trust people now that I never would. And a lot of that was because of the hurts of the past rejections by ministry, because I had been in the ministry, 5 different clergy in my life. I don't know how I stuck in it with the Lord. It was only the Lord that kept me going. And don't ever let go of the Lord. I don't care what struggle you're going through. And if you can get to the bottom, I had to get to the bottom. And I am not ashamed to stand in front of you today because I would die for him today. I said, if somebody, I know it's going to get harder for me down the road because I feel like this is what God's going to have me share, because the church doesn't know how to love these people, the people that are it's seemingly unlovable. He loves everyone. And God asked me one time, and he's asking you tonight, how far will love go? And he asked me one day, and I had to think long and hard about it. And I said, as far as it needs to. And if that's telling my story and becoming a target by the very crowd that won't accept me, I'll do it. Because if there's one person there that can find the hope that I found, it's worth it all.